So I'm going to go through today and talk to you about my 5 key points of building a healthy soil. The first is the least amount of mechanical disturbance possible. And I'm doing that in a no-till situation. I realize organic producers are going to till some, just make your tillage minimal. This slide was put together and it really illustrates the destruction of tillage. This farmer had a forested area and he cleared part of that area, farmed it, intensive tillage, monoculture soybeans for 17 years. And look what happened. That's a picture of the forested area, soils, and then the field that he cleared. What you see is a decrease in organic matter from 4.3 down to 1.6% with 17 years of tillage. I wish I would have had the foresight back in 1991 when I bought that place to archive some of the soils, because I'll guarantee you they look like the soils on your right there. They were compacted, there was no life in them. As I said, we were down to less than 2% organic matter. We had taken the life out of those soils. No-till is a big part of that. And no-till will work anywhere in the world there's production agriculture. I've seen it. It works, and it's key to building healthy soils. The other thing that's key is to take advantage of the natural things that occur in healthy soils, untilled soils. And one of those is mycorrhizal fungi. And I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to get real in-depth with that. But we don't take advantage of the natural processes that occur in our soil. Mycorrhizal fungi will form a symbiotic relationship with the roots. And what it more or less is doing is it's extending the system, the root network of that plant. So that plant is able to gather and store nutrients and water from a much bigger area. Well, when we till, we destroy this. If we have untilled soils and promote healthy soils, we're going to get more mycorrhizal fungi, and we're going to be able to take advantage of that. And I'll show you some pictures coming up of just how important that is. The other thing mycorrhizal fungi can do, when it gets into that host plant's roots, it'll prevent pathogens and nematodes from entering that root cell wall. So we can actually decrease the amount of fungicides, etc., that we have to put on our crops because we're taking advantage of this natural ecosystem process. The other thing mycorrhizal fungi does is it starts soil formation. Think back to that picture I showed there with the 17 years of tillage in soybeans. There's no soil aggregates in that picture. The soil aggregates are being destroyed. Mycorrhizal fungi secretes a glue called glomalin, and that glomalin then is the sticky substance that starts soil formation. So the picture on the left there, that's soil particles being formed due to the glomalin secreted by mycorrhizal fungi. Here's what some of our soils look like today. After 21 years of no-till and everything else I'm going to talk to you about today, but notice that soil aggregation. That's what we want soils to look like. Soils should look like black cottage cheese, full of carbon, full of pore spaces, and that aggregation. Mycorrhizal fungi do a lot of things. They improve aggregate stability, they build soil carbon, they improve the water use efficiency, and they increase the efficiency of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And if we're adding especially phosphorus to our farming practices, that's actually detrimental to mycorrhizal fungi. Ways to increase it: reduce or eliminate chemical use, reduce or eliminate tillage, reduce or eliminate synthetic fertilizers, and you have a living plant root in the ground as long as possible. These are things we can accomplish both in our perennial systems and in our annual cropping systems. It can be done, and I'm going to show you how we've done that. In 2003, I was fortunate, Dr. Kris Nichols there, she did some of the original work when glomalin was discovered by Dr. Sarah Wright. She was a grad student under Dr. Sarah Wright. Dr. Nichols came to the ARS lab in Mandan, North Dakota. In 2003, she came out to my place, looked at what I was doing, and she said, "Gabe, you've come a long ways, but your soils will never be sustainable unless you remove your synthetic fertilizer inputs." And I thought, wow, how can I farm without synthetic fertilizer? So for the next 4 years, we did split trials on our operation. We took fields and half the field would use synthetic fertilizer, the other half we wouldn't. All 4 years, the non-fertilized tracts were equal to or greater in yield than the fertilized tracts. So we haven't used any synthetic fertilizers on our operation since 2008. How has that affected our yield? Our yields are over 25% higher than the county average. Am I the highest in the county? No. Am I the most profitable? Yes. Simple as that. But you have to get your soils healthy first. And I'm in no way standing here to tell you to immediately eliminate synthetic fertilizer. You're going to have a disaster if you do. You need to, it's like a drug addict. You need to wean it off slowly. But once you build that population of soil biology, build that healthy mycorrhizal fungi population, you will be able to drastically reduce your synthetic fertilizer inputs. Okay, the second principle of a healthy soil is armor on the soil surface. Look at perennial native range, always covered all the time. Bare soil is a detriment to soil health. I think back to my father-in-law telling me the more you work the soil, the better it is. That is not the way nature works. Where in nature do you find bare soil? Only where there was a catastrophic event or where man imposed his will on it. This is what happens when we till. This is eastern Colorado just this past January. You'd think it was back out of the 30s and out of the Dust Bowl. Not so. You would have thought we would have learned something in the past 80-plus years. Evidently, we haven't. Last Father's Day, my son said, "Dad, for Father's Day, I'm going to take you. They're having a soil health tour." This is what we took a picture of on that soil health tour. It was an operation with tillage. I don't see much soil health in that photo. This is what it looks like on our operation. That's a seeded field. We want armor on the soil surface. We want that soil covered at all times. Here's a cover crop emerging through that armor on the surface. How are weeds going to germinate there? I'm able to save on herbicides because we have that armor. Weeds aren't going to germinate through that, but the crop does just fine. That residue also buffers our heat. Now, we can get hot, not as hot as you get here in southern Idaho, but we can get pretty hot in August. That heat is detrimental to soil life. Here we had a tour out on our place, and we stuck this thermometer in on your left. That's where the cover crop is. It was almost 100 degrees outside that day, and that thermometer registered 87.6 degrees. On bare soil, 107 degrees. That 20-degree temperature difference is huge. What's the effect of temperature on soil life and on plant growth? At 70-degree soil temp, 100% of the moisture is used for growth. Once we get to 100 degrees, only 15% of that is used for plant growth. So go back to this photo. In other words, if I don't have armor on the soil surface, my plants aren't going to produce. They're not going to grow anymore. But where I have armor, I'm still getting growth out of my plants. That equates to dollars in my pocket. If we get much hotter than that, we start affecting soil biology. And soil biology is the key driver for the nutrient cycle that's going to provide our plants the nutrients. We need to keep those soil temperatures down. The other thing is you have armor on the soil surface and you'll have this. You'll have a lot of biology. There's more microorganisms in a teaspoonful of healthy soil than there are people on this world. Think about that. Yet how often as producers do we think about feeding that soil biology? How often do we think about protecting it, keeping armor on the soil surface? We need to do that. That's the residue brushed away in the cover crop. I know it's hard to see here, but that's solid earthworm castings. When we bought that farm in 1991, I tell people I could never take a day off and go fishing because you wouldn't find an earthworm on the whole farm. Last spring, we did earthworm counts. 12 inches, 2 inches deep. We were averaging over 60. That's a lot of earthworms. I never transplanted any, didn't bring any in. They came on their own. Build it and they will come, but you have to provide the home for them first. Third principle of building a healthy soil is diversity. Look at true native rangeland. This photo here is from one of our native rangeland pastures. And I tell people I bought that land a number of years ago. I bought it for 2 reasons. Number one, because it was true, healthy native range that hadn't been disturbed. My son teaches range management at the local community college. He brought his class out to this particular paddock, and in 2 hours, they counted over 140 different species of grasses, forbs, and legumes. That's diversity. If we have that type of diversity in a healthy native range, why don't we have it on our cropland? The other reason I bought this pasture was simply because with that many rocks, I'd never be tempted to break it up. In 2006, I had the opportunity to speak at a conference, and this gentleman was there, Dr. Ademir Calegari from Brazil. Dr. Calegari is the world's foremost authority on cover crops. He works for the United Nations, traveling all over the world. He's worked in 65 different countries. And he said 2 things to me at that conference that really stuck out. He said, you give me 2 inches of rainfall a year, 200 inches, or anywhere in between, and I can grow you a cover crop. Well, that told me I can do it in my drier environment. The other thing he said is that cover crops are meant to be seeded in multi-species combinations. And I got thinking, duh, I've been using these 2- and 3-way mixes. Dr. Calegari was talking about 7- and 8- and 10-way mixes. Think back to those native perennial ecosystems. What do you find? You find tremendous diversity. I needed to get that into my cropland. So at that time, I was on the local Soil Conservation District Board, and we had some plot land located only a mile south of my farm, and we decided to test Dr. Calegari's wisdom there, and we were going to take and seed monoculture cover crops, strips of them, and then at the end would mix all these species together and seed a diverse polyculture and see what happened. Now, that winter was extremely dry in North Dakota. We didn't have a lot of snow, so we seeded these monocultures and this polyculture into a very dry seed bed in the middle of May. These photos then, here's the plot with the cover crop growing. These photos were taken July 31st. We had less than an inch of rain on these crops. You can see the monoculture of turnips was dead. These were about approximately an acre plot each. Then you move over to the next acre, and there was the radish. That was dried up and dead. And you keep going down the line until you get to the diverse polyculture. Same soils, same seeding date, everything was the same. Look at the difference. Amazing. And that was about a 10-species mix. In other words, here they clipped it. We over tripled dry matter forage production where we had the multi-species combination. So what's happening? How can that be? For all our lives, we've been told that you have to seed these monocultures, otherwise it's going to compete for moisture. That's not the way nature works. Dr. Nichols explained it best. Not only do the fungi, and she's talking about the mycorrhizal fungi, provide for the needs of one plant, but the fungal hyphae pipeline connect to multiple plants, thus supplying the nutrition and moisture requirements of all the plants. So in other words, if we would seed multi-species, that mycorrhizal fungi is going to transfer nutrients, and it's going to be a benefit to all the plants. Think of it this way, the rooting systems, the roots on different plants, they have different root types, different root depths. They're bringing nutrients and moisture from different areas of the soil profile. I spent a lot of my time talking in the Midwest, and this is what I see in the Midwest. Monoculture of corn, monoculture of beans. Remember this photo. What happens to soils under monocultures? Monocultures are a detriment to soil health. There is no doubt about it. If they weren't, then why in nature don't we find monocultures? So this is what it's evolved to, and I'm jumping ahead. You know, I didn't get to this point overnight. It took a lot of years of trial and error. My son and I have a few sayings on our operation. One of them is that we want to fail every year. If we don't fail at something, we're not trying enough new things. So I've tried hundreds of different combinations over the years, but we've gotten to the point where we no longer seed monocultures. In the upper left there, that's oats with clover growing in it, cool season grass. Upper right is a mix of cool season broadleaves sown as a polyculture. The lower left, that's corn with hairy vetch in it, warm season grass along with a cool season legume. And in the lower right, that's actually sunflowers, warm season broadleaf, with over 20 species of cover crops growing with it. We're trying to mimic nature. We don't do monocultures anymore on our operation. I mentioned we have 2,000 acres of cropland on our operation. We try and get a cover crop on all 2,000 acres every year, either before a cash crop, along with a cash crop, like this case, or occasionally after the cash crop. But we want something growing at all time. Here's a close-up picture of that oats. We no longer use any synthetic fertilizers, as I mentioned. We haven't used pesticides or fungicides since before the turn of the century. There's no need when you get a healthy soil. Nature will take care of those symptoms if you allow her to. Here's what it looks like close up. We seeded 3 types of clover along with the oats. We can typically get our yields of oats are in the 95 to 115 bushels without fertilizer. And when you're talking our land values, that's pretty profitable. We can make significant profit at that. The beauty of it is we straight combine the oats off. We got that living cover. All those legumes just explode, fixed nitrogen, can provide grazing for our livestock if we so desire. The fourth principle, living root in the ground as long as possible. That's where cover crops come in. And I think of cover crops as a diverse mix that enhances the life and the function of the soil, because we're really feeding all that soil biology. We're promoting that mycorrhizal fungi. You use cover crops to design them for what you don't have. You know, there's a big cover crop craze going on throughout the country. And I've seen a lot of disasters with cover crops because people don't plan properly. What are you trying to accomplish with that cover crop? Are you trying to increase organic matter? Are you trying to put armor on the soil surface? Are you trying to improve water infiltration? And the list goes on and on. But before you start planting cover crops, you have to decide and determine, what's my resource concern? What is it I'm trying to do? We have 2,000 acres of cropland. I honestly don't know how many fields. I haven't added it up. But we design cover crop mixes specifically for each field, because the resource concern will usually vary from field to field. So, for instance, if you have the resource concern of a compaction layer, then you're going to use cover crops such as this is a daikon radish. And if you look down in that soil profile, there was a compaction layer down about 12 inches. Notice that radish? It tried growing down in the ground, hit that compaction layer, it comes back above ground till it gets enough energy to poke its way through. Radishes are also a nitrogen storage tank, so we use them in combination with legumes to sequester and store nitrogen for the next crop then. That's my fertilizer storage tank right there. These radishes can get really large if you grow them, seed them a little later in the year. If you seed them in the spring, they're going to bolt and shoot a seed head and they won't produce that big tuber. But they can get really big. This system that I'm talking with you about today can take place anywhere in the country. And I've got producers all over the world that are using this model, and Joel will talk about it later today too, to produce a healthy ecosystem. This picture is of David Brandt, a friend of mine near Columbus, Ohio. David has been a no-tiller since '72, cover crop since '78. 2011 here, 225 bushel corn, 0. Synthetic inputs, 0 herbicides, 0 pesticides, 0 fungicides. That's profitable. David likes to brag about the big radishes he grows. Him and I always have a contest, so I brag about my turnips. This is a partial list of the cover crops we grew on our ranch here this past year. Don't pay any attention to the species, because that's gonna vary from area to area. But pay attention to what I've got here. I've got some species in all 4 crop types: warm and cool season broadleaves and grasses. I'm using the cover crops to get diversity into my annual cropping system to build soil health. And that's what it's about. We're trying to address those resource concerns and build soil health. So I question the rationale of some things. My neighbor's not here today, so I can talk about him. I've been on that farm since 1983. His farm is directly across the road there from me. Every fall, he goes out and digs this low spot. Has done it every fall for 31 years. This is a photo taken June 15th of 2009. I took it off the front deck of my house. The local weather service was forecasting a major rainfall event, which for us means anything over ½ an inch. But I took this photo. It started raining at 6:30 in the evening, and by 12 midnight, we had 13.2 inches. This is a photo of the neighbor's dug area 3 weeks later. Still had water sitting there, and this happens every year. This photo here is my cropland directly across the road from his. Immediately following, we had 4/10 more inch of rain the next day. Immediately following that 13.6 inches of rain. Do you see any erosion there? Now, I've got a little bit of bare soil in the foreground here where when you get that much rain, it's going to move a little of that residue away. Jay Fear, our district conservationist, came out and took these photos. And he says, here's a photo of the soil that day, the morning after 13.6 inches. Jay makes the claim you could have drove a floater truck or any type of equipment over that field that day without rutting it up. Look at the soil aggregation. If you have those water infiltration pores, you're going to take that water down, then you're going to hold it in the soil profile for when you need it. I mentioned when I started out in 1991, we could infiltrate 1/2 of an inch per hour. 2011, the last time NRCS come out and tested my soils, we can infiltrate over 8 inches an hour now. I've never seen it rain 8 inches an hour. It's not how much moisture you get, it's how healthy are your soils. Can they infiltrate it, and can they hold it and store it? That's what it's about. The fifth thing, animal impact. The fifth principle of building a healthy soil. I own this newspaper, the Prairie Farmer, from 1871. And it depicts the bison and the wolves following the bison, keeping them moving. How were soils formed? Soils were formed in conjunction with herbivores. Why don't we have that in agriculture today? We had these large herds of bison, etc., moving across the plains, and then we also had the local animals, the rabbits, grasshoppers, all these insects. They were taking this forage, the biomass, and cycling it through. Animals are an important part of a healthy ecosystem. Today, it's not uncommon to drive for thousands of miles and not even see a fence, let alone an animal. Why have we removed them from the ecosystem? And then we expect our soils to be healthy? Not going to happen. 2007, I was speaking at a conference in Brandon, Manitoba, and I got done speaking, and I had this guy in my face telling me that, boy, you see what I'm doing. And that was Neil Dennis from up there in Canada, and Neil's the mob grazer who puts up to 1 million head of livestock on an acre. I thought I was high stock density, running 200,000 to 300,000 pounds live weight per acre, till I met Neil. Well, that next spring then, I went up there and viewed his operation to see what he was doing. And the thing that amazed me is when we dug down in his soils, he was building more topsoil quicker than I was. And that bothers me, because I don't like to be second fiddle, you know? But the important thing was that I could take a lesson from Neil. And I knew immediately that Neil was doing this on perennial pastures, and I understood that. But I needed to get more animal impact onto my cropland. That was the missing link in building soil health further on my cropland. So this is our ranch today. This isn't quite all of it, but the light blue areas are cropland. The light green areas are tame grass pastures. In other words, it was tilled at one time and now is seeded back to perennials. And then the yellow area is our perennial pastures. I mentioned we had 3 pastures starting out. We now have over 100 permanent pastures, but an infinite number of smaller ones. When we took over that operation, we could run 65 cow-calf pairs and about 35 yearlings. Today we're running 350 cow-calf pairs, 400 to 800 yearling and grass-finished cattle, plus some other livestock I'll talk to you about. But why I wanted to show you with this map is to show you that we're able to integrate all three of these, the perennial natives, the perennial tame grass pastures, and the cropland. We integrate them all and graze livestock on all of them. Now, one of the easiest ways to get started into grazing animals on cropland is with fall-seeded biennials. This photo was taken here in early October. We had just harvested a crop and then went in there and seeded. In this case, it's a combination of winter triticale, a forage winter wheat, hairy vetch, sweet clover, and there's some radish in there. And it's just poking through the ground there in October, even though we froze many, many, many times before that. So what we'll do then, we'll let that go, and then the next spring, we'll mob graze high stock densities on these high carbon biennials. And we build very small paddocks. This photo I'm just using for illustration was taken on some tame grass pasture. But we'll go out there, and I don't care if you even have one animal, you can do high stock density grazing. Just make your area small enough. That's all there is. So we'll go out there in the morning and we'll roll up the previous day's paddock, set up the new days, takes about an hour. We'll use these bat latches in the lower left. Bat latches are a little solar-powered gate opener. That's a bungee cord attached to them. We punch the time in, we want that to open, and then the livestock move themselves the rest of the day, so we don't have to be there. So when we're using this as a tool, and that's all mob grazing is it's a tool, just like no-till is a tool, cover crops are a tool. These are all tools, but we'll use that to address our resource concern. And in this particular case, where we're mob grazing these fall-seeded biennials, our resource concern is trying to get more armor on the soil surface. So we let that go, that in order that cover crop get to a higher carbon state. Now, obviously for gain, if we wanted maximum gain on the livestock, we'd graze it, when it's more immature. But we want the higher carbon state. There, the bat latch just opened, and in this particular photo, there's about 675,000 pounds of live weight per acre that are moving on to the next break. And there is what we're left with. That solid mat of carbon on the soil surface, the armor that's going to protect that soil. We only want the livestock to eat about a third of the above ground biomass. What happened when the herds of bison were moving across the Great Plains? Were they eating everything? No, they were trampling way more than they were eating. But it's that biomass on the soil surface that causes nutrient cycling. It's armor to protect the soil. It's preventing from the temperatures rising. It's preventing from wind erosion and doing all these healthy things that occur in a healthy ecosystem. Then what we can do, this is a photo just 3 days later. So we were grazing this at a higher carbon state. It was already starting to form a seed head. So when we run those livestock on there, they trample it, and it's going to die. And then I don't need a herbicide, and I can go in there immediately and seed again. Now, our window growing season is not very long. I don't have time then to get a cash crop established, but I can certainly get another cover crop established in there, which is what we do. In this particular case, we're going in with a very diverse mix. It's during the warm time of the year, so we're primarily going to use warm season species. Sorghum, Sudan, millets, sunflowers, cowpeas, soybeans, that type of thing. I still add in some cool season species just because in case we get one of these cold fronts blowing through, which can happen, we'll have something that's able to cope with those temperatures. But look what I'm doing with this amount of diversity. I'm really accelerating biological time. If I would seed these as monocultures, it'd take me 20 years to accomplish what I'm able to do in 1 year. Here's the seed just poking up through the soil surface. Notice that aggregation there. I don't like this photo. There's too much bare soil, but it does show how all these seeds seeded together at the same depth do just fine. And they come up and grow just fine together. We're optimizing solar energy collection with these diverse cover crops. If you have a monoculture growing out there, how many leaf sizes and shapes do you have? One. No matter what direction that sun is from this field, I'm going to be harvesting solar energy. And that's what it's about for us as producers. We want to capture that soil energy, sequester it as carbon, and start the nutrient cycle, feed soil biology. So if we get any moisture at all, this photo was taken with about 2 inches of moisture on it, and we can get some really good growth. Remember, my soil temps are kept lower. I don't evaporate down as deep. My soils are much more efficient water use-wise than other soils. Then we have a lot of options with that cover crop. We tend to grass finish things, so we can turn some animals onto that warm season cover crop and grass finish. When we do that, we do not run near as high a stock density because we're shooting for maximum gain. We want those livestock gaining 2.5 pounds a day, and they'll do it on these warm season mixes. Or we can let it go and just let it continue to sequester carbon and to build biomass. And that's what it looks like then after a frost. Remember, extend the growing season. I used to think that, our average last frost in the spring is mid-May. First one comes in the fall, early September. I thought that narrow window was my growing season. As we've gotten a healthier soil, the biology in the soil keep the soil temperature warmer. We can easily grow species up until Thanksgiving most years. Now this year with the cold we've had, we're probably done for the year. Here's how we convert most of our cover crops to dollars though. We used to calve in February and March, which is the reason I have no hair, because it just doesn't work in North Dakota. We now calve in late May and June out on grass. We leave the calves on the cows all winter out there grazing. And they do just fine. The beauty of these cover crops is you can add so many different species and you can balance their rations. This calf here is eating hairy vetch. Hairy vetch in December will still be 18% crude protein. Their nutritional needs are met by the cover crop. Why in the world would I want to go put up hay, spend dollars? We have a motto on our operation. We want to sign the back of the check and not the front. It's a pretty good motto. It leaves a lot more in your pocket. It does. It works good. It's a lot of fun, too. Allows me to come to Idaho when I could be home working, feeding hay. I'll tell you a little story with this here. This fall, we had father-son. They had heard about our operation, traveled up for a tour. And they were explaining their operation to me. They ran 1,000 cow-calf pairs, and then they backgrounded the calves. And they said, well, we got 2 hay machines. We put up hay. We got 3 balers. We got 2 semis to haul all that hay home. And then in the winter, we start 4 tractors every day to feed those 1,000 cows and their calves. And they turned to my son, and they asked him, well, what's your day like? And he says, in the winter. And he says, well, I usually get up and make some coffee, and then I sit in the recliner and watch TV. He says, my biggest problem is I wear out too many recliners. Last year, we wintered 350 cow-calf pairs. We started a tractor once. Animals have 4 legs for a reason. We don't need to provide them with a bed and breakfast. Let them find it on their own. And they prefer to do that. I honestly believe they're happier doing that than if we would confine them. When we start confining animals, we start causing more problems. And they can do it when it's real cold. That's not muskox. That's 350 cow-calf pairs grazing cover crops at over 40 degrees below zero. I actually felt a little sorry for my son as I sat in the pickup and he walked out and took this picture. But they're doing just fine, and they survive just fine. Now, part of the problem is you got to make sure you have the type of cattle that can withstand those conditions. But we do by letting nature make the selection. Then what we're able to do when we trample all that residue onto the soil surface, and remember when we're grazing in the winter, it's just like in the summer, we don't want those livestock to eat all that. We want to trample residue, but we can build topsoil. This photo here, see where the blue lines are? That's the residue, the cover crop, we trampled 3 years later. That's about 3 inches of new topsoil that we're building. Now, I'm not going to call it all topsoil. It's biomass also. It's organic material laid down on top. But we're able to accelerate soil formation by using the principles of nature. Here's what I like to say. 1/3 for the critters above ground, 2/3 for those below ground. That's what it looks like in the spring then after we grazed one of these cover crops. We have that armor on the soil surface protecting the soil. I'm going to show you the fallacy of the current production model now. This particular field here, we went and took standard N, P, and K soil test. I know that's too small to read, but in the upper left it says pounds of nitrogen in the top 10 inches of soil, 2 feet of soil profile is 10 pounds. How many bushel corn crop can you get off 10 pounds of N? Not much, I heard. I'll show you what I can do on 10 units of N. Here we are planting into that residue. When I say I'm a no-tiller, I'm a no-tiller. On the left is planted, on the right is not. I don't use trash whippers, that's way too much tillage. Don't use row markers, too much tillage. Okay? We don't want to disturb that armor. We want that protection there. Here's photos then. I plant corn about May 15th. Here's June 16th, July 1st. Where's the residue? I'm not out there cultivating, I'll tell you that. Where's the residue going? Here's a photo of that same corn crop then at tasseling time. Dr. Ray Ward at Kearney, Nebraska, he owns Ward Labs. Him and I are friends. He used to think what I was doing was a bunch of hogwash. So he came up himself then and took these leaf tissue analysis of that corn. Every single nutrient he tested for was sufficient or above. I didn't add anything. We don't put on anything. We don't use foliars, no amendments of any kind, certainly no synthetics. So I went from that soil test that showed I only had 10 units of N